What's good? It's your brother YK the Truth, and I want to help the sister Tasha Xi out. I'm not trying to expose you, sister. I just want to critique your information and hopefully guide you in the right direction. This is not an attack video. Hopefully, you can learn something from this video, sister. All right. So the sister claims that only 1,000 slaves were sold each year. So where do all of these people come from?
From here, Alexandria, Virginia, and shipped to New Orleans and to Natchez, Mississippi for a retail price. By 1830s, they're often sold 1,000 people annually, operating as one of the largest slave trading companies in the United States until 1836. Slave traders continuously owned property until 1861. So what is that saying? If this place sold only, they're trying to make it like a high number, 1,000 people annually, where all these other people come from? Right? Where all these people come from? This is one of the largest, largest slave trading companies in the United States. They often sold 1,000 people annually. Y'all do the numbers, some of y'all who are familiar with the numbers, it don't add up.
If only 1,000 people were sold, and this was the largest slave trade at that time. So where did these people come from? Okay. So let me break it down to you, sister. Okay, so here it goes. Here's a scholarly article from alexandriava.gov. A loathsome prison, slave trading in antebellum Alexandria. All right, so I'm going to go to page 8, sister, to break these things down because I see that a lot of confusion in this community is from lack of proper research and research methodology skills. You know, you can't just go to these historical signs that you see and ask questions as if you're proving a point. You have to know the history behind it. And if you don't know the history behind it, find the history behind it before you make yourself look foolish, sister. So let's get to it. Let's go to page 8 of this article. And I'm going to leave this article in the description because it breaks down all of this stuff that you want to know about. All right. So it said the trade in human chattels. All right. Because it was chattel slavery. Now, between 1828 and 1836, the building located at 1315 Duke Street in Alexandria, Virginia, with its adjacent slave yards, served as headquarters for the largest and most profitable slave trading operation in the South, the firm of Franklin and Armfield. But it was during the 1820s and 30s, when under the occupation by Franklin and Armfield, that this building served as the administrative center for the eminent slave trading firm in the South. Okay? In the South. Now it says Isaac Franklin, a native of Tennessee, and John Armfield, a relative by marriage, took advantage of the burgeoning market for enslaved persons in the southwestern states, created as a result of the ban imposed on the importation of the enslaved into the United States in 1808, whereas most slave traders operated on a relatively small scale. So when you ask these questions like, well, where did all these people come from, right? A lot of the slaves were already in America. You have to also understand that this has been something that was practiced for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there were already slaves in America. Not only that, sister, if you look at the year, it says 1808, whereas most slave traders operated on a relatively small scale. Franklin and Armfield were one of the few who became millionaires as a result of their dealing in enslaved people. So it only means that between 1828 and 1836 that they only sold 1,000 slaves annually. Only then. But you have to understand that there were millions of slaves sold prior to that. Not only that, you have to take into consideration that they were also breeding slaves under the table.
From here, you get a bird's eye view of a business that's going lickety split. Where it happened was cotton and tobacco went sick, and it was either fish or cut bait. There was no question which I'd do. I turned this plantation into a breeding farm. And I must say it was a timely move, because right after that, they passed a new law prohibiting the importation of African Negroes. And of course, that sent the market sky high.
In Virginia, they had breeding farms. I did a whole video about this. So, sister, here's an article, and it's called The Truth About American Slave Breeding. And it was shared by William Spivey. All right? It is excerpted from Birthing a Slave, Motherhood and Medicine in Antebellum South. Excerpted from Birthing a Slave, Motherhood and Medicine in Antebellum South by Mary Jenkins Schwartz, published by Harvard University. Now, this is going to break down to you the confusion that you have where you keep saying, well, where did these people come from?
So what is that saying? If this place sold only, they're trying to make it like a high number, 1,000 people annually, where all these other people come from?
Only 1,000 people annually. So y'all have to, where the numbers at? This is what you said, right, sister? Now it says by the 1820s, planters and would-be planters were moving in large numbers to places previously unavailable for settlement and growing the fiber for sale in Europe and New England, where a textile industry was beginning to thrive. Okay? They needed cotton. Remember, cotton was king. Cotton was king. The extension of the so-called Cotton Kingdom required new laborers. As of 1808, remember that number, 1808, when Congress ended the nation's participation in the international slave trade, planters could no longer import additional slaves from Africa or the West Indies. But now check this out, right? You have to also understand that they were importing slaves illegally. This has been documented. All right, so let's keep going. The only practical way of increasing the number of slave laborers was through new births, which, with so much at stake, black women's reproductive role became politically as well as economically decisive. If enslaved mothers did not bear sufficient numbers of children to take the place of aged and dying workers, the South could not continue as a slave society. In this book and many other sources, it made to appear that America had little choice but to increase the slave production to offset the altruistic end of the international slave trade, which Congress banned in 1808. Thomas Jefferson was president at the time. He had no problem with slavery. He literally loved his slaves, failing to free even Sally Hemings' children, all 6 of them believed to be his according to DNA evidence until after his death. Okay? Jefferson was a Virginia farmer, knowing full well the value of slavery to the Southern economy. Congress at that time was controlled by the party he created, the Democratic Party, not to be confused with either the Democratic or Republicans of today. They didn't end the international slave trade to harm slavery, but to preserve it. Domestic slavery, in particular, Congress wanted to decrease the external supply to keep prices up for the homebred slaves. Okay? Article 1, Section 9, Constitution of the United States. Americans did not take up breeding slaves in response to congressional actions. That action was taken at the behest of slave breeders as a protectionist means to keep the price of their product up.
And of course that sent the market sky high.
Jefferson State, Virginia was the leading producer of slaves. Slavery eventually exceeded tobacco as their leading export. So when you say things like, well, they only sold 1,000 slaves annually, where did all of these people come from? You have to remember slave breeding. You have to remember that slaves were also auctioned off under the table. So not every single slave was traded by that way. You had illegal trades. So let's keep going. Economist Richard Such did a study which found that in 1860, on farms that had at least one female slave, the ratio of women to men was 2-1. In Virginia, females slaves exceeded males by over 300,000. They were used to breed. Robert Lumpkin ran what is mostly referred to as a slave jail, with little recognition that he ran the nation's largest breeding farm. He personally had 5 children with a slave Mary, who he ultimately remembered in his will. While other owners of the breeding farms and plantations in general fornicated at will with their property, they also utilized selective breeding, maintaining their own large bucks and importing large male slaves for the purpose of breeding good workers for the fields. So, I hope I broke this down to you, sister, that it was only between those years that those slaves were sold 1,000 annually. Okay? Slavery has been practiced for hundreds of years prior to that. And then you had slave breeding as well as that. So you have to understand history, sister. So Tasha Xi, I hope this video, educated you, because this is not an attack on native so-called indigenous people. This is my opportunity to rescue you from your ignorance. And I will try to do so as humble as I can, because it's easy for us to attack those who look just like us. But this is not an attack video. This is to just show you that you were mistaken, sister. So it's your brother YK the Truth, and I'm out. Peace.